Well, we're going to move right into our first presenter of the afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Geraldine Rayner. She's a director of aceBIM Consulting. That's a company that specializes in providing building information modeling consulting and project management services to the AEC industry. She has a broad understanding of the industry based on her 25 years experience as a principal and project manager architect, overseeing the use of various software solutions to deliver projects, most recently, of course, within a BIM environment. Would you welcome, please, Geraldine Rayner. Thank you for being with us.
Well, firstly, that's a pretty hard act to follow, so hopefully I don't put any of you lot to sleep. I want to look at this from the perspective of communicating in a digital world. When we actually look at what we do or what we've done for the past 400 to 500 years, we've created drawings. Why have we created those drawings? What function or purpose do those actually serve? And it's really to communicate. The only role they have is to try and explain the ideas and concepts that the design side have come up with to the build side so that they can price it and work out how to build it. And what I would say is that communicating via a paper medium in this digital age is not really where we want to be. If I look at us as human beings, and we've heard a lot about this, we've got 5 senses. 3 of those senses really are not a lot of use to us as how we communicate. Our sense of touch, taste, and smell accounts for about 6% of the information we absorb, whereas our hearing and vision is much more valuable. Hearing accounts for maybe 11%, and as you heard from the previous speaker, your vision actually accounts for 83% of the information you absorb on a daily basis. So visualization is huge, and it's where we really need to focus our efforts. We forget color. When we actually work in a 2D world and we print to black and white, we forget how important color is to us. Color actually allows us to absorb information and retain information at sort of 60 to 80% more efficiently than if you didn't have color. And yet we repeatedly print down to black and white 2D. I'm going to take a little trip back 30 years to 1982, which is when I actually joined the workforce as a graduate architect. And it was a very different working world. And I want to use it as a sort of illustration to compare the changes that I've seen in my working life and the changes that are going to come as I carry on working. 30 years ago, we had things called secretaries. They had shorthand as a language that they used, and they had typewriters, and we had things called die-line printers. If I wanted to write a letter, I handwrote it, I gave it to the secretary, she typed it, she gave it back to me, I proofread it, and if it was okay, I signed it, and it got posted. If somebody had said, oh, by the end of your working life, you're going to be typing your own letters, we would have thought they were mad, because that wasn't an efficient use of our time to learn how to type and actually type our own letters. But that's what we're effectively doing. We also had drawing boards. I'm, like previous speakers have said, started with pen and paper or ink or mylar. You had to plan. There was no way you could cut, paste, copy. You had to plan out what your drawing looked like, what scale you were doing before you started, because you couldn't change it. It was too difficult to change. But there was one really important thing that was happening. We didn't have to think how we drew. None of our brain was really focused on that. All we had to think about was, what are we drawing? And it was transparent, and by that I mean anybody could walk around that drafting studio, whether it was in the mechanical, the electrical, the architectural, or the structural sides, and could see exactly what was happening, what was being created, what stage the process was in, and how far along everybody was. If you were going wrong, they could correct you. So you found the senior project managers would walk around the office towards the end of the day. They would check what you were doing, and they would steer you in the right direction if you were heading off track. We don't have that now. The information is locked away. If you look at the technology that has sort of come and gone, or even, in some cases, like a video, it's come and it's disappeared within that 30 years. other technology like Letraset that we used to use. Because we didn't have typewriters, you had to do it with scratching the letters off onto the drawings, or else you had to do the stenciling. It's all gone. So we've had an enormous change, and anybody that thinks that the change is slowing down is wrong. It's speeding up. It's getting faster and faster and faster. Some people haven't changed. Kodak, 10 years ago, was the name in film, and yet today they're in bankruptcy protection, and that's in a 10-year lifespan. They felt that the general population would not be interested in digital cameras, and there was no point in them investing in that technology. They were, in fact, the people who had the first digital cameras, but they felt it was only going to be used by the professional photographers, and they learned a hard lesson. There's a generation in this room that's grown up with digital information, and there's a generation that's had to learn to live with the digital information. There's probably people in this room that quite happily purchase their music digitally. They store all their photographs digitally on the cloud. And yet, if you purchase a movie or music in a digital format, you don't actually end up with anything in your hand. You've got it, you can listen to it, but there's nothing tangible that you can actually get hold of. You can search it, it's much more efficient. You can sort whether you want this type of music, that type of music. But there's a generation that didn't grow up with that digital, which likes to actually hold something. I've got it, I've purchased this is mine. And that's missing. We have adapted in some ways. Not many of us use maps any longer. We tend to be quite happy with the GPS to help us get around from A to B. But that also has its problems. You can fail because you enter something slightly incorrectly, or it hasn't updated because of the roadworks. And we've also got Google. And I want to focus a little bit on Google because, to me, there's lessons we can learn from what Google's doing that we need to bring into the AEC industry. I can go onto Google with no particular skill set, and I can search that data. I can see it as a globe. I can zoom in on any particular street, town. I can choose to see roads, boundaries, restaurants. I can choose what I want to see and how I want to see it. I can't do that currently within the AEC industry. There's also a huge problem we've heard again and again today with information overload. We now quite happily all use email, but it's incredibly inefficient because we very rarely use it with any structure. So you will suddenly find you're copied on an email, and if you actually scroll down, you'll find there's a chain of 10 or 11 emails that you feel, well, I'd better read it because I've been copied on it, so maybe there's something in here that somebody feels is relevant to me. Chances are it's not, and you've just wasted 10 or 15 minutes going through and searching this, and then what do you do with it? There's a tendency to feel that if we copy everybody, we're going to mitigate our liability somehow because we told them. And all that happens is we actually get swamped with useless information or useless data, and we have to learn how to deal with that and how to put some structure around it. The gaming industry has spent billions of dollars on working out how to connect us more closely with the games that people participate and play in. And we need that similar piece to come into the industry, because currently the data is locked away. There's few people in the audience here who have a skill set to allow them to go into the software and to operate it. The majority of people, which are the older people, don't have that skill set, and they are isolated from the information that's being created in the way that in pen and paper everybody could walk around and see everything. Now you can't see what's happening. And the only way you get to see that information is when the team prints out a 2D set of drawings for you. And then you mark it up and you hand it back. And they have to make those changes and it has to go back into the digital environment. So we have to work out how can we actually allow the non-technology people, the decision makers, actually access to that information so that they can query it and they can interact with it without actually having to learn the skill set to operate the software. We were in this building last night, and that geometry of those waves which I believe is the Aurora Borealis, couldn't have been created with the 2D. It's too complex. So this sort of wonderful BIM technology is allowing us to do designs that previously would have been beyond our powers and our capabilities to actually do, whereas now you can do it, but you have to be prepared to share that information. Back to Boeing. I'd actually put this in before I realized we were going to have a Boeing speaker here. But the important thing for me in this is not the fact that it was all done digitally, but it's the fact that the comment that working together, they actually had to change the way that they did it. They had to learn to communicate far more and in a different manner. And we need to do that within the industry. We're very segregated. We fall into definite silos of the design side, the build side, and the operate side. And we need to break down those barriers so that people can actually work together and communicate. And I've heard that several times in several of the presentations that have been made, the importance of being able to communicate. We've got some rocks in the road. Some of them are small and some of them are bigger, but they're all surmountable, and we have the wherewithal to actually work around and get around these problems. To begin this, you have to determine what your goals are. If you don't understand what your goals are, and we heard this with the BIM execution plan, you really have got a problem. From your goals, you can work out what your use is going to be for this data. And as one starts down this road, you don't want to expect all the data is going to be used. You need to work out what use different bits of the data are going to be used for so you can actually proceed. If you create everything to a level, we're not at Boeing's standard yet. We just fail. So we have to work out which are the pieces where there is huge value in actually creating this information digitally, and we can move forward. We've got liability, scope, risk, reward, and a basic understanding and a desire to want to move in this direction. If you think of the uses, the team has to get together. They have to sit down and work out what this data is actually going to be used for so that we can have some chance of relying on it. Who's it going to be used for? I'm sorry, who is going to use it and who is going to create it? They're two different pieces. And you have to agree amongst the team which piece of information gets created by whom and what use is that information going to be used for. But not only that, at what point in time is it necessary to have that piece of information so that the team can carry on working? They used to be able to say photographs never lie. That's not true. Once you move into a digital environment, everything can be faked and altered and moved around and changed. So how do we have trust, and can we rely on the data that people are creating? That takes a trust in the group you're working with. It comes back to collaboration, and it's putting a team together that's used to working together or knows how to work together and knows that they can begin to rely and trust on the information that's actually created by the various groups. You also have to work out which bit are you responsible for. You're creating all this data, and this data has to start fitting together, and you've got a huge number of disparate people creating it. But which piece are you actually going to be held accountable for in the big picture? And how are you going to put those pieces together? And when does that piece need to actually come in and fit into the puzzle? There's risk. Some people are more averse to risk than others. The build side of the industry is used to handling risk. That's part of their business, and therefore they are more prepared than the design side to take on and assume some of the risk. Whenever you embark on a new venture, there's risk associated with it. But the question is working out what the risk is, who is the risk associated with, and is there anything we can do to actually mitigate what that risk is? Some people would never do this, whether or not they had any safety equipment or not. Others would give it a go. We also have to deal with the issue of reward. If we start sharing information, there's a group that's put in the time and the effort. They've purchased the software, they've learned a skill set, they've trained their people, and now they're being asked to share that information and give it across to another group that is going to use it to their benefit. and there is a perception, whether right or wrong, as to what am I going to get for it? Where's my reward in doing this work and doing this effort? There's also a requirement to change, in some cases, the way in which you work. For the mechanical consultant, they typically created a diagram, which was lines and symbols, and now they're asked to create reality. That looks different if you try and put it down as a 2D plan and print it. So there are issues and there are problems that one has to deal with, but the issue of reward needs to be addressed by the team. There's a fear of the unknown. It goes back to risk. Some people don't want to change. They're quite happy doing what they're doing as a blinkered view. I've done it this way for 10 years or 50 years, and I've got 10 years to go before I retire, and I really don't want to learn something new. I've heard it repeatedly. I'm going to retire in 5 years, and I don't want to know that. I'm not interested. Or, I've done this for 30 years. You can't tell me how to do stuff. I know exactly how to do this. I know how to read a drawing. We have to overcome some of those issues. Some people will never change. They won't want to come on this journey, and they will stay where they are. In my opinion, if we don't change and adapt, then we're going to have some serious problems. The industry is very inefficient. On average, the design side creates 30% more documents than the build side ever uses. Whether that's just a fact of CAD and that we could copy-paste, or it's so easy to generate information, but we're generating information that doesn't have value to the people who we're trying to communicate with. So we need to understand what it is that the build side of the industry needs from us so that we can communicate to them clearly the information they need, because that's the reason we do this, is to communicate the design. This is a quote that comes from Fast Company magazine, and this is a magazine that focuses on basically innovative companies, where they're going, what they're doing, and looks at those sort of leading-edge, cutting-edge companies and sees what's working, what's not working. And it says you simply can't afford to be sentimental about the past. Future focus is an imperative for business. Trying to replicate what worked yesterday only leaves you vulnerable. In my opinion, what we are currently doing is we're trying to replicate the 2D drawings that have worked in the past. And when we move into this digital environment with BIM, we need to move away from drawings as a means of communication and start using a form that allows people to generate whatever view makes the most sense to them. In the same way I could go onto Google and I could search and ask Google to show me the view that I wanted to see. We need to be able to provide information that allows each of the entities to go on and search and see that view for themselves. They should be able to cut their own plan, their own sections, see their own plans, their reflected ceiling plans. They should be able to color it. They should be able to turn things on and off. They should be able to interact with it. They should be able to audit it and validate that data. If we look at where we are currently, we have a data flow occurring. It's sort of sporadic. It's sort of hit and miss, but it's certainly happening in pockets in the design side. It's happening in the build side, and it's beginning to happen in the operate side. The problem is we don't have a means of easily communicating that information across those divides. It gets stopped repeatedly and dropped back to paper, which means other people have to start again and recreate it. And I want to finish with Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And we as an industry are in the midst of the most enormous change, and we have to learn to adapt to it.